had the privilege of chatting with Julian Ball, the creator of Lens Island, a full-time game developer that has over 3,000 very positive reviews on Steam, and it's not even fully released. I asked Julian about the state of the indie game industry. I wanted to know if it's too late for indie game developers who want to break into the market. What he said was incredibly encouraging, so stick around to the end. Do you agree that the indie game industry is struggling right now?
Oh, I would say no. I don't agree.
Okay. See, Gavin, who made Choo Choo Charles, he agrees with you. He's said as much as well, that it's like it's not struggling. What's struggling is publishers and AAA.
Yeah, I agree.
So, do you agree? Next question is then: do you agree that a good game can get buried and not see any eyes on it on Steam just because they didn't market it well? Or do you think no, if it truly is a good game, it's just going to rise to the top?
I think it really depends on your definition of good. I think there's a lot of AA and AAA games that are making good games, and good as a definition of solid games. Technically, if you look at a whiteboard and you look at the feature lists, you're like, yep, it's got the bones there, it's got everything it needs to be a good game. But then a lot of them are quite uninspired, not necessarily groundbreaking. They don't have unique hooks. They don't actually have some sort of value proposition outside of the fact of this is a solid gameplay experience. And it's people don't want solid gameplay experiences. They want good games. They want a game that provides them something they haven't been provided with before. So I think in general, AA and AAA are taking less and less risks. And it's sort of a self-perpetuating cycle where it's because the industry for that sector has been a little bit more cutthroat, big studios are trying to do take less risks. So they're making more watered down, mundane, sort of just solid games. And solid games used to sort of cut it when there was 100 games launching every year. But now there's 30,000 games launching every year. And that doesn't matter. Your solid, just standard run-of-the-mill game doesn't really, maybe before, just due to the fact there were such little games, it could have had a chance for sort of mediocre success, but now less so. But I just really think that those games in general were never going to be truly successful. They were almost just filling a void in media consumption, where it's no, I've got nothing else to do, I'll just play this average game. And I think indies and just people just out on their own, they don't have 100 mouths to feed of a big studio. They don't have necessarily shareholders and this whole structure imposing all of this risk. So they take more risk and they choose more unique visions. They sort of break the boundaries a little bit and create just more games with hooks. Indies are just better at creating games with stronger hooks across the board.
Because they're low risk.
Exactly. And it's they don't even care about the risk. It's if you just quit your job at McDonald's to make a game, it's what's the risk to you? You go back to McDonald's. So you try anything you can to just make the craziest, most amazing game possible. But if you're heading up a large studio, the risk of a game failing is I'm going to ruin hundreds of lives. I am going to cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. It is just exponentially greater the risk. So I think it's all about just risk in the industry and what larger studios define as risk. I just think that mentality is what is failing. It's more just game design companies and game design culture and game design as an art. I would say that is the mechanism that sort of is bad and failing to a degree at the moment in some studios. And that's not really a mechanism that exists inside of indies for the most part. So,
okay.
Yeah.
That's really encouraging, seriously. And I've because I'm part of the publisher world, because all of my games get published. I see how the sausage is made, and I experience the corporate. It's just a mess of communication sometimes, and then you've got C-level people and you've got shareholders who want changes in the game on the indie side. Right. So all of that corporate nonsense funnels down to the indies that they're publishing. And suddenly you're in a situation where you've got a watered down vision of an indie game, which is like the worst possible thing.
Yeah.
Because an indie game's not going to make $100 million most likely, or 50 million, you know? And so you've got this game where it's watered down, and so it's not going to compete. It's not going to be able to compete with the other indie games that are not watered down, because those games were willing or able to take risk because they didn't have the corporate structure, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I've discovered this year is that getting a publisher is a great thing if you need the money. But right now, in particular, getting a publisher means that you're probably going to get bogged down with corporate nonsense that will then water down your vision, thus in creating more risk for your game's launch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, like
Cool.
Publishers are like that glue between the AAA, AA, and the indie scene. Like they're that sort of like tear in the middle, and sometimes it can really leak down and affect. And that just like all depends on the publisher, right? Or like sometimes not even publisher. Sometimes it might even just be. There's also marketing firms that do sort of royalty-based stuff, and then you also just get investors and stuff, and more like a traditional business sort of model. But either way, it's like when there's a larger business imposing their risk assessments onto an indie, then it's like, boom, like you're like, you're being sort of controlled by that sort of scene and by those decisions, and it absolutely will affect the indie. And that just comes down to like publishers are like a tightrope. I've always really steered away from publishers. However, there are amazing publishers out there. Like I have a lot of friends that have work with publishers, and you know, the right ones, like they have nothing but amazing things to say about them. But there's also a lot of horror stories, right? So
there are.
Yeah.
And you know, for me, I've found that some of the, maybe I'm trying to think here, two really crucial things. It might just be one, but two really crucial things here about picking a publisher is, number one, if the publisher is a big time publisher, that could be a huge red flag, because the big time publishers are funded by these huger companies, like much bigger companies. And so again, that corporate structure funnels down into your project and it becomes a freaking nightmare. That's one side of it. The second side is, or second point I'd like to say is that just because a publisher is offering you $1 million in funding, that actually, like, I would rather get offered $100,000 in funding at a really low royalty fee, because as opposed to $1 million at a higher, like a 50-50 split. And the reason why is because with $100,000, you're not really going to be controlled that much, because it's low risk for the publisher. That's pennies to a publisher. But the moment you go up to like $1 million in funding, or maybe $500,000 in funding, suddenly that publisher is going to be much, much more involved in your project. And so all those beautiful hooks that you've got, all those idiosyncrasies that make your game strange and unique, they might be offensive to a publisher. Or not offensive, but it might scare the publisher, right? Because they're investing all this money. So my sort of advice to people listening now, if they do want to get a publisher, and based on what you've said as well, is that steer clear or be very vigilant about publishers who are throwing around big lump sums of cash, because you're going to become kind of their slave, and you don't want that. Not with an indie title, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like publishers in general, they feel like the delta between what is possible for you to make on your own and then what is the ceiling of your potential success with that thing that you could potentially make. So it's like if for example, like when I had started making Lens Island and got traction by myself, had a few 100,000 wish lists, the game was fun, and I was like, I think I have the potential to finish this game. I had an idea of what our future success could be. Like I could sort of extrapolate where I was now to like, okay, the future version of Lens Island released could sell 500,000 copies. Like it could do like really well in certain ways. And like that's what I'm playing with right now. Like my decision making isn't this game that hasn't been built yet that's earned $0. My decision making is around like a game and an IP that's worth millions and millions of dollars, because like the future version of the released product is what actually matters here. So and then it's like, can I get to that by myself? And then if I can't get to it, if I could get to like 50% of that vision by myself, then what does that future projection like sort of look like? Am I okay with that? If I'm not okay with it, would it be better to get a publisher to get to that top projection, but then have to minus what the publisher is going to take? And it's sort of just like what you think like your potential for success is on as an individual or as a team versus like the potential success. And if you're okay, like it's sort of like a sliding scale, right? And like sometimes if you're lucky, if you have a Kickstarter, if you have sort of like alternate sort of income streams, you can go a lot further, like completely on your own without a publisher. So you can just like, that delta's a lot smaller. Yeah. But if you're trying to make a really big game with a big team and you have nothing to back you, then it's like, you basically don't know that game. You know, like you're giving a development team and an idea to a publisher, and you're getting a little cut out of that dream game. Because guess what? Like you don't have a game studio built that has the money to back this. So like that's just not how the real world works. So it's all about like the assessment on that delta is like the big thing. Because like I was approached by a lot of big publishers, you know, like published like 505 games, like ones that were like, oh shit, like these make some of the biggest games in the world that like I've played, and now they want to like own my game or publish it. But you just gotta like take those rose-colored glasses off. It's like the decision you're making, so that like it doesn't matter. Like you don't base it off what your current state is. You base it on what the future state of the successful released product is. Like that's what you base your decision making on. So
by the way, if you're like me and you always dreamt of making an indie game as a full-time job, I have a free webinar below that goes into exactly how to make six figures with just a demo. I was just like you for years. I thought I had to make a game in its entirety before getting a paycheck, but there's actually 3 ways to make 6 figures before even finishing your game. I've done this multiple times. So check it out below if you do want to go full-time indie. And thanks for watching.